Oi pessoal, tudo bem? Hey guys, how are you? It's Nakatake. Do you guys enjoy Kendo? Today, I'd like to talk about evolution of Kenjutsu swordsmanship through repeated peace and war. Let's go. In the 16th century, Japan became more peaceful and there were fewer battles. However, some bushi were working as administrative workers and spiritual education was carried out within the bushi in order to prepare for a war that may occur at any time. On the other hand, as the number of battles has decreased, the way of swordsmanship changed and it became an art form. Around the 16th century, there were 623 schools of swordsmanship, and people competed with members from other schools to hone their skills and hunt them down. However, games against different schools were banned by the government, aiming for a more peaceful world. Since it was not possible to inherit the technique through practice, the technique was inherited in the form of kata and writing. Many bushi were skeptical about these transformations of swordsmanship into an art form. Then, in the first half of the 17th century, in consideration of safety, gekken, a new method of practicing swordsmanship, was devised. This method was practiced by fighting against opponents using shinai, bamboo sword, and bogu, body armor. At the time, they were allowed to hit anywhere, even the parts without armor, bogu. It's scary. I will leave the URL of a video below. Please take a look if you are interested in the gekken. From the middle of 18th century, foreign ships approached Japan one after another. That made Japan feel a sense of crisis and the need to spread practical tactics, and swordsmanship and gekken became popular again. Due to the Meiji Restoration, the number of wars increased, and the need for swordsmanship increased. However, when the Meiji government was established and the country became stable, the government issued a policy called Haito Edict, which forbade all people to own swords. At the time, bushi were also deprived of their status. The Satsuma Rebellion was a war where bushi fought against the government forces because they were dissatisfied with the unfavorable treatment. Uh, in this war, they often had to fight on rainy days. The government forces struggled because firearms were their main weapons, but they wouldn't work very well in the rain. Therefore, after this war, the government forces decided to assign human resources with great swordsmanship to each prefecture. This custom is still alive, and it is for this historical background that many Japan police officers are strong at Kendo. Uh, by the time the Haito Edict was issued, civilization was taking place, and traditional Japanese things were considered to be old. Swordsmanship, kenjutsu, and gekken were declining because they were thought to be lame. However, due to the success of the government army's battle in the Satsuma Rebellion, kenjutsu, swordsmanship, and gekken became popular again. In such a trend, martial arts such as jujutsu and kenjutsu, swordsmanship, began to be introduced into school education. However, school education couldn't take in those martial arts just to teach combat techniques. It was decided that the character Do would be used to emphasize the value placed on cultivating spirituality throughout long history. So, the name of martial arts changed from Bujutsu into Budo, from Jujutsu into Judo, and Gekken into Kendo. As I mentioned earlier in this video, there used to be about 600 schools of swordsmanship. However, they were unified and rules for competition were established in order to provide uniform guidance in school education. With that, the number of Kendo players increased dramatically. However, in World War II, Kendo was considered useless to fight the war and became obsolete. And after the defeat in 1945, Kendo was banned by GHQ. However, it seemed that there were some people who secretly practiced Kendo so that Kendo wouldn't get caught even if it was banned. In 1950, a sport called Shinai Kyogi began to be played. This sport was basically Kendo, but besides the change in the name, the rules were also fixed to resemble Western sports. Through the established Shinai Kyogi, more women started playing it. When the occupation of GHQ ended in 1952, the name Kendo began to be used again, and it was considered as a martial art, not a sport. In this way, Kendo is a Japanese culture that sublimates the technique of hurting people, which was developed in the process of repeating war and peace as a means of self-growth. Thank you for listening to the end.